Hi there. Tonight we pull back the velvet curtains and peek into the meticulously organized, yet often surprisingly demanding, daily lives of Victorian women. Imagine yourself waking up in a dimly lit bedroom, the gaslight still unlit, as the first rays of dawn filter through heavy drapes. You stretch, perhaps stifle a yawn, knowing that your day, like a perfectly orchestrated symphony, is about to begin. It's a day filled with prescribed duties, social expectations, and often a quiet hustle that might surprise those who only picture languid ladies on fainting couches. You probably wouldn't survive a single morning without at least one minor, corsetry-related existential crisis. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And do feel free to post where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your day as a Victorian woman typically began with elaborate morning rituals, awakening and dressing. This wasn't a quick hop out of bed and into jeans. Oh no, the process of getting dressed alone was a significant undertaking, especially for middle and upper-class women. First, you'd be helped by a lady's maid, if you were fortunate enough to have one, or manage yourself if you were of more modest means. The layers began with a chemise, a light undergarment, followed by drawers. Then came the dreaded corset. This wasn't just about fashion, it was about shaping your body to the ideal Victorian silhouette, cinching your waist often to an uncomfortable degree. Fastening it could be a struggle, requiring assistance or a good deal of leverage. Over the corset went a camisole or corset cover, followed by multiple petticoats to create the desired voluminous shape. Only then would the actual dress be put on, often a day dress with a high neckline and long sleeves designed for practicality and modesty. The meticulous attention to hair, which was usually styled elaborately, and minimal subtle makeup, too much was considered vulgar, completed the ensemble. Imagine the sheer physical effort involved. Just getting ready for the day could feel like a workout. This mainstream historical fact, the multi-layered, restrictive nature of Victorian women's clothing and the time it took to dress, meant that even the act of preparing for the day was a significant daily commitment, reinforcing societal ideals of femininity and decorum. Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of corsetry was primarily a fashion choice driven by aesthetic ideals, or if it also served as a tool of social control, physically restricting women's movement and reinforcing their perceived fragility. It's a bit like deciding if a beautiful but uncomfortable pair of shoes is truly worth the pain. Sometimes fashion wins out, sometimes it's simply expected. You might find yourself breathing shallower, moving more deliberately, your posture rigidly straight, all thanks to the tight lacing that defined your silhouette and, in a way, your social role. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some very dedicated fashionistas in the latter part of the era even adopted wasp waists, cinching their corsets so tightly that their waists could measure as little as 18 inches, often leading to fainting spells and internal organ displacement. Imagine literally having to take a break from breakfast just to catch your breath. The quiet rustle of petticoats, the gentle creak of stays, and the careful arrangement of hair were not just personal acts. They were the daily performance of Victorian womanhood, setting the tone for a day structured by duty, social interaction, and an underlying adherence to strict societal norms. Each button, each lace, was a tiny affirmation of your place in the world. Once dressed and ready to face the day, your primary managerial role as a Victorian woman, particularly in a middle or upper-class household, immediately began. This brings us to household management, overseeing domestic staff. Imagine you, the mistress of the house, perhaps seated at your meticulously organized desk in the morning room. consulting ledgers and schedules while the faint sounds of activity filter up from the servants' quarters below. Your job wasn't to scrub floors, but to orchestrate a small army of individuals who did. You see, for any household of a certain standing, servants were an absolute necessity, and their management was exclusively the domain of the mistress. Your day would involve planning meals with the cook, overseeing the housemaids' cleaning schedules, inspecting their work for dust or disarray, instructing the laundress, and perhaps even managing the governess if you had children who were past infancy. This wasn't a passive role. It required keen organizational skills, a good understanding of budgets, and often a firm hand to ensure discipline and efficiency among your staff. The quality of your servants reflected directly on your capabilities as a manager, and by extension, on the respectability of your family. This mainstream historical fact, the significant time and effort Victorian women dedicated to managing household staff, was central to their daily lives and social standing. Historians still argue whether the management of servants truly empowered Victorian mistresses, giving them a sense of control and purpose, or if it simply replaced one form of labor with another, albeit more supervisory one, still confining them to the domestic sphere. It's a bit like being promoted from doing chores to assigning them. You're still thinking about chores, just from a different angle. You might find yourself meticulously checking the silver for polish, inspecting the laundry for proper whiteness, or discussing the week's menu with your cook, making sure everything was just so. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Victorian mistresses kept detailed household books, not just for finances, but for tracking servants' behavior, infractions, and even their personal characteristics, creating a sort of internal HR file for their domestic empire. Imagine having a detailed report card on your scullery maid's efficiency, the quiet authority you wielded over your domestic staff, the constant oversight required to maintain a well-ordered household, meant that your days were filled with administrative duties, ensuring that the wheels of your home turned smoothly. This was your domain, and its flawless operation was a testament to your competence and a vital part of your contribution to the family's social presentation. While the mistress of a grand house might primarily oversee staff, for the vast majority of Victorian women, particularly those of the middle and lower middle classes, their days involved a much more direct, hands-on engagement with their domestic environment. This brings us to domestic chores, hands-on housekeeping. Imagine you, a Victorian wife without a retinue of servants, or perhaps with just one overworked maid of all work. Your morning, after the elaborate dressing ritual, would quickly shift from a supervisory role to one of direct, often physically demanding, labor. You see, even in households that were not strictly working class, the upkeep of a Victorian home was an immense undertaking requiring constant attention and physical exertion. Without an army of staff, tasks like cleaning, cooking, laundry, and mending fell squarely on your shoulders. Washing clothes, for instance, was an all-day affair, involving boiling water on a stove, scrubbing heavy fabrics by hand with harsh lye soap, rinsing, wringing, a Herculean effort, and then hanging clothes to dry, often outside in unpredictable weather. Cooking involved tending open fires, preparing food from scratch, no ready-made meals here, and managing rudimentary cooking equipment. Cleaning meant sweeping, dusting, polishing, and scrubbing every surface, often with homemade concoctions. This mainstream historical fact, the laborious and time-consuming nature of domestic chores for most Victorian women, meant that their physical activity throughout the day was substantial and unavoidable. Historians still argue whether the physical demands of Victorian housekeeping for women, without significant servant staff, contributed to their perceived delicacy and frequent nervous ailments, or if it simply reflected a society where physical labor was the norm for women of all but the highest classes. It's a bit like wondering if constantly climbing stairs builds stamina or just wears you out faster. For many, it was likely both. You might find yourself kneading dough until your arms ached, scrubbing a stubborn stain until your fingers were raw, or hauling buckets of water upstairs, all while meticulously maintaining your composure and your carefully constructed appearance. Here's a quirky tidbit. To ensure the cleanliness of their homes, some Victorian women would spend hours meticulously blacking their iron grates and stoves with a special polish, a dirty and tedious job that had to be done regularly to maintain the appearance of a well-kept hearth. Imagine dedicating a significant portion of your morning to polishing a piece of metal just to make your kitchen sparkle. The quiet hum of domestic activity, the rhythmic sounds of sweeping, scrubbing and stirring filled your home, a constant reminder of the endless cycle of tasks. This hands-on engagement with your domestic sphere meant that your days were less about elegant leisure and more about the relentless, unglamorous work of maintaining a respectable Victorian home, a physical testament to your dedication and skill. Beyond the physical demands of managing the household, a Victorian woman's day was profoundly shaped by her most sacred duty, shaping the next generation. This brings us to child rearing and education, shaping young minds. Imagine you, a Victorian mother, spending hours with your children, not just overseeing their physical well-being, but meticulously guiding their moral compasses, nurturing their intellects, and instilling in them the values essential for navigating Victorian society. You see, Victorian society placed immense emphasis on the moral and intellectual development of children, particularly in middle and upper-class families. The mother was considered the primary educator and moral guardian, responsible for instilling piety, obedience, diligence, and respectability. Your day might involve supervising lessons taught by a governess, but you would also spend significant time reading aloud, teaching religious stories, overseeing their studies, and correcting their manners. For younger children, you were responsible for their early education, teaching them letters, numbers, and basic moral precepts. Discipline, while often strict, was ideally tempered with affection and designed to build character. This mainstream historical fact, the Victorian mother's central and highly influential role in the moral and intellectual upbringing of her children, was a defining aspect of her daily life. Historians still argue whether the intense focus on moral education truly produced more virtuous children, or if it sometimes led to a repressed and anxious generation burdened by impossible standards. It's a bit like trying to grow a perfect rose in a hothouse. It might look flawless, but it could be delicate and easily damaged by the outside world. You might find yourself patiently correcting a child's posture, gently guiding them through a biblical passage, or carefully monitoring their playtime to ensure proper behavior, all while striving to be a living example of Victorian virtue. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some very dedicated Victorian mothers would use elaborate moralistic toys or games to teach their children lessons, like miniature Noah's Arks for biblical instructional card games designed to teach about virtues and vices. Imagine your child learning about greed by playing a card game where the greedy character loses all his imaginary shillings. The quiet intensity of these interactions, the constant awareness of your profound influence on developing souls, meant that your day was deeply intertwined with the lives of your children. This rigorous approach to child rearing was not just a duty, it was seen as a sacred trust, a vital contribution to the future of your family and society, consuming a significant portion of a Victorian woman's waking hours. Beyond the confines of the home and the demands of child rearing, a Victorian woman's day was also punctuated by essential interactions that maintained her family's standing and her own place in society. This brings us to social calls and visiting. Maintaining networks. Imagine you, a Victorian lady, meticulously selecting your bonnet and gloves, preparing to embark on a series of polite visits to friends, acquaintances, and even strangers. These weren't casual drop-ins, they were highly ritualized social exchanges, crucial for lubricating the wheels of society. You see, for middle and upper-class Victorian women, social calling was a fundamental social obligation and a significant part of their daily routine. It was a complex system of etiquette that dictated when, where, and for how long you could visit, and whom you could receive. You might leave your calling card at the homes of new acquaintances, signifying your willingness to establish a connection. Return calls were expected within a specific time frame, and failing to reciprocate was a serious social snub. These visits, often brief and formal, served multiple purposes. They allowed women to maintain their social networks, gather and disseminate information, read, gossip, arrange marriages, and subtly reinforce their family's social status. This mainstream historical fact, the importance of formal social calling as a daily activity, was vital for a Victorian woman's social currency. Historians still argue whether the elaborate etiquette of social calling primarily served to create a sense of community and shared cultural understanding, or if it was a superficial and often anxiety-inducing performance designed to reinforce social hierarchies and exclude outsiders. It's a bit like a highly choreographed dance. It looks elegant, but every step is prescribed, and a misstep could lead to a stumble. You might find yourself making polite conversation about the weather or the latest scandal, all while mentally ticking off names on your social ledger, ensuring you hadn't missed any crucial calls. Here's a quirky tidbit. To signal her availability, a lady might leave her drawing room door ajar when receiving callers, or, conversely, keep it closed to indicate she was not at home, even if she was, simply to avoid unwanted company. Imagine signaling your social availability, or lack thereof, with the position of a door, the quiet rustle of skirts as you moved from carriage to doorstep, the polite inquiries, and the careful navigation of social niceties filled a significant portion of your day. This constant engagement with the social sphere, even within its rigid rules, was a crucial part of a Victorian woman's daily life, ensuring her family remained firmly within the intricate web of polite society. Amidst the societal obligations and domestic duties, Victorian women also carved out time for pursuits that, while seemingly leisurely, were deeply intertwined with their expected roles. This brings us to needlework and creative arts, productive leisure. Imagine you, a Victorian lady, seated in a comfortable drawing room, perhaps by a window, your fingers deftly manipulating a needle, yarn, or paintbrush. This wasn't merely a pastime, it was a demonstration of feminine skill, domesticity, and often a quiet act of creation. You see, accomplishments in needlework, embroidery, painting, or playing a musical instrument were highly valued in Victorian society, particularly for middle and upper-class women. These activities were not just for personal enjoyment, they were considered essential accomplishments that enhanced a woman's attractiveness as a marriage prospect and demonstrated her refinement, patience, and domestic virtue. A beautifully embroidered tablecloth, a skillfully painted watercolor, or a gracefully played piano piece spoke volumes about a woman's character and upbringing. These pursuits were also practical. Needlework often produced garments, linens, or decorative items for the home, blending leisure with utility. This mainstream historical fact, the significant time Victorian women devoted to needlework and other domestic creative arts, was a central part of their daily routine and identity. Historians still argue whether the emphasis on these accomplishments was primarily a way to provide women with fulfilling, albeit domestic, activities, or if it was a subtle means of keeping them occupied and confined to the home, preventing them from engaging in more public or intellectual pursuits. It's a bit like giving someone a very intricate puzzle. It keeps them busy and challenges their mind, but it also limits their field of vision to the puzzle itself. You might spend hours meticulously stitching a complex pattern, feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction as the design emerged under your nimble fingers, or practicing a challenging piano piece until your fingers ached, striving for perfection. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Victorian ladies would even create elaborate hair pictures or hair wreaths from the hair of deceased loved ones, intricately weaving strands into floral designs as a form of morbidly sentimental art. Imagine creating a beautiful, detailed landscape entirely out of human hair, perhaps using different shades from various family members. The quiet click of knitting needles, the soft swish of a paintbrush, or the gentle melodies from a piano filled the domestic sphere, turning leisure into a productive, virtuous endeavor. This productive leisure, far from being idle, was a vital part of a Victorian woman's daily performance of femininity, showcasing her grace, skill, and dedication to the ideals of the home. In an era before instant communication, connecting with those beyond your immediate household required deliberate effort and a particular skill. This brings us to correspondence and letter writing, connecting through mail. Imagine you, a Victorian woman, seated at your writing desk, perhaps by a window, your pen scratching softly across crisp paper. Each carefully formed sentence, each precise flourish, was a conscious act of maintaining relationships, exchanging news, and sharing sentiments across distances that felt far greater than they do today. You see, letter writing was an indispensable part of Victorian life, especially for women. With no telephones or email, letters were the primary means of communication with family members living far away, friends who had moved, or even potential suitors during courtship. A significant portion of your day could be dedicated to composing and receiving correspondence. This involved not just writing the letters themselves, but also managing stationery, stamps, and understanding the complex postal system. Women often maintained extensive correspondence networks, sharing news, offering advice, and exchanging social pleasantries. This mainstream historical fact, the pervasive and vital role of letter writing as a daily activity, was crucial for maintaining social and familial bonds for Victorian women. Historians still argue whether the formality and time required for letter writing fostered deeper, more reflective relationships, or if it sometimes inhibited spontaneous expression and created a more constrained form of communication compared to modern methods. It's a bit like comparing a hand-stitched tapestry to a machine-printed photograph. One takes more time and effort, but both serve to convey an image. You might find yourself carefully crafting a letter to your sister, detailing your children's latest achievements, or composing a polite reply to a social invitation, always mindful of appropriate tone and etiquette. Here's a quirky tidbit. Victorians often used secret messages in their letters through the way the letter was folded or the placement of the stamp, conveying sentiments like, "I love you" or "I am angry," without a single explicit word. Imagine receiving a letter and having to decode its hidden meaning from the position of a tiny stamp. The quiet scratching of the pen, the careful sealing of envelopes with wax, and the anticipation of a reply filled your mornings or afternoons. This diligent engagement with correspondence was not just a chore, it was a deliberate act of connection, a lifeline across miles, and a vital part of a Victorian woman's daily performance of her social and familial duties, ensuring that even distant relationships remain robust and cherished. Beyond the active engagement with social networks and domestic duties, Victorian women also sought moments for quiet introspection and personal growth. This brings us to reading and self-improvement, intellectual pursuits. Imagine you, a Victorian lady, finally settled in a quiet corner of the drawing room or library, perhaps with a novel, a volume of poetry, or a serious treatise in your hands. These moments, though often constrained by societal expectations, were vital for intellectual nourishment and personal cultivation. You see, While formal higher education was largely inaccessible for most Victorian women, reading was a widely encouraged and respected activity within the home. Women were expected to be well read in classics, poetry, and moralistic literature. They might also engage with periodicals, improving their general knowledge or keeping abreast of social issues. Many women, particularly those with intellectual leanings, devoured novels, philosophical works, or even scientific texts, though perhaps discreetly. Reading was considered a virtuous pastime, believed to enhance a woman's character, intelligence, and conversational abilities. This mainstream historical fact, the significant time Victorian women dedicated to reading for both leisure and self-improvement, was a common and valued part of their daily routine. Historians still argue whether the emphasis on reading for women primarily served to educate them within the confines of their domestic roles, or if it inadvertently sparked intellectual curiosity and ambition that eventually challenged those very confines. It's a bit like giving someone a key to a small garden gate, only for them to discover it also unlocks a vast, unexplored forest. You might find yourself lost in the pages of a Dickens novel, pondering the moral dilemmas of its characters, or quietly absorbing information from a non-fiction work, feeling your mind expand even as your physical world remained circumscribed. Here's a quirky tidbit. To avoid the perception of idleness, some women would even hide frivolous novels inside. The covers of more respectable, weighty books like sermons or religious texts when visitors were expected. Imagine quickly swapping out a thrilling Gothic romance for a volume of improving essays as a knock came at the door. The quiet turning of pages, the rustle of paper, and the focused gaze of a woman engrossed in a book filled these moments of personal time. This engagement with the printed word, whether for moral upliftment or sheer enjoyment, provided a crucial intellectual outlet and a path to self-improvement, allowing Victorian women to cultivate their minds even within the rigid structures of their daily lives. Beyond personal cultivation and domestic duties, many Victorian women dedicated a significant portion of their time and energy to improving the lives of others, often those less fortunate. This brings us to charitable work, philanthropic endeavours. Imagine you, a Victorian woman, donning a simpler outfit, perhaps a sensible bonnet, as you prepare to leave the comfort of your home to visit a workhouse, a hospital, or a Sunday school. This wasn't merely a pastime, it was a deeply felt moral obligation, a reflection of Christian charity, and often a vital outlet for your organisational skills and compassion. You see, for middle and upper class Victorian women, direct involvement in charitable activities was a highly respected and common daily pursuit. With limited professional opportunities outside the home, philanthropy offered a socially acceptable and morally lauded avenue for their intelligence, organisational abilities, and emotional energy. Your day might involve visiting the sick and poor, distributing alms, teaching in Sunday schools, organising fundraising bazaars, or serving on committees for various benevolent societies. These activities were seen as a crucial expression of Christian duty and a way to uplift the less fortunate, ensuring social stability. This mainstream historical fact, the pervasive engagement of Victorian women in charitable and philanthropic work, was a significant and often demanding part of their daily lives. Historians still argue whether women's extensive involvement in charity primarily served to reinforce existing class structures and their own subordinate domestic role, or if it also provided them with invaluable management experience and a legitimate sphere of public influence that later contributed to the suffragist movement. It's a bit like wondering if volunteering at a soup kitchen is purely altruistic, or if it also provides a sense of purpose and social connection. You might find yourself listening to the struggles of a poor family, offering words of comfort, or meticulously organising a clothing drive, feeling a profound sense of purpose and compassion as you engage directly with the social ills of your time. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some very dedicated Victorian philanthropists even conducted detailed slum surveys, meticulously documenting the living conditions of the urban poor, sometimes living among them briefly to gain a deeper understanding of their plight. Imagine giving up the comforts of your home to temporarily reside in a grim tenement, all in the name of social reform. The quiet determination of these women, their willingness to confront hardship and disease outside their sheltered lives, meant that their days were often filled with impactful, emotionally taxing work. This charitable engagement was not just an act of kindness. It was a profound expression of their social conscience, expanding their influence beyond the domestic sphere and making a tangible difference in the lives of many. Even with a household staff, or when managing your own domestic realm, the practical necessities of daily life often required a Victorian woman to venture beyond her home. This brings us to shopping and errands, navigating the city. Imagine you, a Victorian lady, perhaps dressed in a practical walking dress and sturdy boots, venturing out into the bustling streets. Your purpose isn't leisure browse, but the deliberate acquisition of goods necessary for your household's smooth operation. You see, while gentlemen often handled larger financial transactions and business dealings, the responsibility for procuring daily household supplies, from foodstuffs to fabrics and notions, typically fell to the mistress of the house. Your day might involve a trip to the local market for fresh produce, a visit to the draper's shop for new cloth, or a stop at the apothecary for medicines and toiletries. This wasn't a quick dash to a supermarket. It involved multiple stops, often haggling over prices and relying on your knowledge of quality and value. For those without private carriages, this meant walking, taking omnibuses, or perhaps a hansom cab, navigating crowded and sometimes dirty city streets. This mainstream historical fact, the daily engagement of Victorian women in shopping and running household errands, was a practical and often physically demanding aspect of their lives. Historians still argue whether these daily trips out of the home provided women with a crucial sense of autonomy and connection to the wider world, or if they were simply another arduous chore that reinforced their domestic responsibilities without truly expanding their sphere. It's a bit like deciding if driving to the grocery store is an exciting adventure or just another item on your to-do list. It largely depends on your perspective and alternatives. You might find yourself carefully examining goods, haggling over the price of a yard of lace, or patiently waiting for a vendor to serve you, all while keeping a watchful eye on your purse and your surroundings. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some very particular Victorian shoppers would carry small magnifying glasses to inspect fabrics and produce for floors, demonstrating their keen eye for quality and their dedication to getting value for money. Imagine pulling out a tiny magnifier to inspect the stitching on a glove. The quiet concentration required for these errands, the careful budgeting, and the navigation of the public sphere meant that even seemingly mundane tasks contributed to your sense of purpose. This daily engagement with the city's commercial life, while practical, also provided a vital, albeit limited, connection to the outside world, making it a routine yet often revealing part of a Victorian woman's day. While much of a Victorian woman's day revolved around duty and domesticity, moments of diversion and enjoyment were also woven into the fabric of her life, often outside the confines of the home. This brings us to public entertainment, concerts, museums, parks. Imagine you, a Victorian lady, escaping the strictures of your domestic sphere for a few hours, perhaps accompanied by a chaperone or a close companion, seeking refreshment and cultural enrichment in the burgeoning public spaces of the city. You see, as Victorian towns and cities grew, so did the opportunities for respectable public entertainment. Your day might include attending a classical music concert, where you could listen to the latest compositions from European masters, or visiting a museum, marveling at artifacts from distant lands or scientific displays. Public parks, which were increasingly developed during this era, offered a space for leisurely strolls, gentle exercise, and the opportunity to see and be seen. Art galleries, botanical gardens, and even certain lectures also provided acceptable avenues for cultural engagement. These activities were not just for pleasure, they were also considered important for intellectual improvement and for maintaining social connections. This mainstream historical fact, the increasing availability and participation of Victorian women in public, cultural, and recreational activities, provided important, if circumscribed, opportunities for leisure outside the home. Historians still argue whether these public leisure activities genuinely offered women a sense of freedom and intellectual stimulation, or if they were merely another extension of the domestic sphere, still governed by strict rules of propriety and observation. It's a bit like being allowed to leave your house, but only to walk around in a carefully designated, perfectly manicured garden. It's still a form of confinement, albeit a pleasant one. You might find yourself quietly appreciating a soaring soprano's voice at a concert, or gazing with fascination at an exotic plant in a glass house, feeling a subtle thrill of engagement with the wider world. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some public parks had designated ladies' promenades where women could walk and socialize without fear of encountering inappropriate male company, further highlighting the era's meticulous social engineering. Imagine a pathway specifically designed to ensure your purity and peace of mind. The quiet rustle of your skirt as you strolled through a meticulously landscaped park, the polite murmurs of conversation in an art gallery, or the swelling crescendo of an orchestra provided moments of respite and enrichment. These forays into public entertainment, while always conducted with an eye towards decorum, offered vital breaks from domestic routine and a chance for Victorian women to engage with culture and society on a broader, if still carefully controlled, scale, maintaining the delicate balance between domestic duty, social obligation, and the carefully cultivated image of Victorian womanhood required constant vigilance over one's personal presentation. This brings us to health and beauty regimen, maintaining appearance. Imagine you, a Victorian lady, spending diligent hours in front of your dressing table, applying lotions, brushing your hair, and perhaps even engaging in more unusual practices, all in the pursuit of the era's ideal of feminine beauty and well-being. You see, Victorian society placed immense importance on a woman's appearance, seeing it as a reflection of her virtue, social status, and a testament to her husband's prosperity. This meant a daily regimen that, while less overtly cosmetic than modern routines, was meticulous and time-consuming. You would likely use cold water and mild soap for washing, as excessive bathing was sometimes viewed with suspicion. Hair care was paramount. Long hair was considered a woman's crowning glory, requiring extensive brushing and elaborate styling. Skin care focused on achieving a pale, unblemished complexion, often through the use of concoctions like rosewater and glycerin, or even more dubious whitening agents. The aim was a natural, delicate glow, not overt makeup, which was associated with actresses and prostitutes. Dental hygiene, though rudimentary by modern standards, was also practiced. This mainstream historical fact, the elaborate and naturalistic beauty regimens of Victorian women, reflected societal pressures to maintain a pristine and demure appearance. Historians still argue whether these beauty standards were primarily a genuine expression of aesthetic taste, or if they were another subtle form of social control, reinforcing female passivity and the focus on outward presentation over intellectual or professional pursuits. It's a bit like choosing to wear a very uncomfortable but fashionable dress. You might genuinely like how it looks, but it certainly restricts your movement. You might find yourself diligently brushing your hair for 100 strokes each night, carefully applying soothing lotions to your face, or enduring unpleasant remedies for minor blemishes, all in pursuit of that elusive, perfect Victorian complexion. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some desperate Victorian women would even resort to consuming arsenic wafers or drinking vinegar to achieve a desired pale complexion or thin waist, despite the obvious health risks. Imagine ingesting poison in the name of beauty, simply to fit an impossible ideal. The quiet persistence of these daily rituals, the dedication to maintaining an unblemished and natural appearance, meant that a significant portion of a Victorian Woman's Day, often hidden behind closed doors, was devoted to self-presentation. This continuous effort ensured that she consistently met the exacting visual standards of her era, reinforcing her role within a society obsessed with outward respectability. Despite the restrictive clothing and the pervasive ideal of delicacy, Victorian women were not entirely sedentary. Physical activity, albeit constrained by propriety, was still a part of their daily lives. This brings us to physical activity and exercise. Gentle recreations. Imagine you, a Victorian lady, perhaps venturing out for a brisk walk in the park or engaging in a polite game on the lawn. These were not vigorous sports as we know them, but carefully chosen activities designed to promote health without compromising decorum or inciting undue exertion. You see, while strenuous exercise was largely considered unfeminine and potentially damaging to a woman's delicate constitution, moderate physical activity was encouraged for health and vitality. Daily walks were very common, often taken in parks or along fashionable promenades, sometimes with a chaperone or a dog for company. Activities like croquet, archery, and gentle gardening were also popular, allowing for fresh air and light movement within a respectable setting. Horse riding, though requiring more specialized attire and skill, was also a favored pastime for some upper-class women. The emphasis was always on graceful movement, not athleticism, and activities were chosen to complement, rather than contradict, the image of refined femininity. This mainstream historical fact, the promotion of gentle, decorous physical activity for Victorian women, was a recognized component of their daily well-being and social life. Historians still argue whether the limited scope of acceptable female exercise primarily served to maintain patriarchal control over women's bodies and public presence, or if it genuinely reflected the medical understanding of health and appropriate physical expression for women at the time. It's a bit like deciding if a tightly controlled garden path is a pleasant stroll or a restrictive maze. It depends on your perspective on freedom. You might find yourself enjoying the fresh air and the gentle exertion of a walk, feeling a subtle sense of invigoration, even as you remained acutely aware of your posture and gait, ensuring they remained perfectly ladylike. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Victorian women even adopted specialized walking costumes or promenade dresses that were more practical than typical day dresses, featuring shorter skirts, relatively speaking of course, and sturdier fabrics to facilitate their daily constitutionals. Imagine a wardrobe specifically dedicated to the art of polite strolling. The quiet rhythm of footsteps on a gravel path, the gentle swing of an arm holding a parasol, or the soft thwack of a croquet mallet filled these moments of recreation. These gentle physical activities, while far from athletic by modern standards, were essential for maintaining health, providing fresh air, and offering a subtle release from the more sedentary aspects of domestic life, all while reinforcing the prevailing ideals of feminine grace and propriety. As daylight waned and the demands of the domestic sphere quieted, the Victorian Woman's Day often shifted towards the more elaborate and intensely social realm of the evening. This brings us to evening social engagements, balls and dinners. Imagine you, a Victorian lady, transformed from your practical day dress into an exquisite evening gown, adorned with jewels and carefully styled hair, preparing to step into a world of polite conversation, music, and formalized interaction. You see, for middle and upper-class Victorian women, evening social engagements were not merely entertainment. They were crucial arenas for networking, solidifying family alliances, and presenting oneself and one's daughters on the marriage market. A significant portion of your week, particularly during the social season, could be dedicated to attending formal dinner parties, soirees, musical evenings, or grand balls. These events required meticulous preparation, strict adherence to etiquette, and often late nights. You would engage in polite conversation, perhaps dance, often a physically demanding activity in voluminous gowns, and observe the social hierarchy and interactions around you. This mainstream historical fact, the pervasive and highly ritualized nature of evening social engagements, was a major component of a Victorian woman's daily life, especially for those in higher social strata. Historians still argue whether these formal social events were primarily stifling performances of class and gender, or if they also offered genuine opportunities for connection, intellectual exchange, and even discreet romantic pursuits. It's a bit like deciding if a meticulously choreographed play is entirely about the script, or if the actors can still find moments of genuine expression within it. You might find yourself gracefully navigating a crowded ballroom, engaging in witty banter with a gentleman, or perhaps discreetly observing a potential suitor for your daughter, all while maintaining an air of refined composure. Here's a quirky tidbit. At grand balls, a dance card was often used by ladies to keep track of their dance partners for the evening, ensuring no gentleman was overlooked and no social faux pas occurred. Imagine a tiny booklet listing your dance appointments for the entire night, a testament to the structured formality of the evening. The quiet rustle of silk and satin, the murmur of polite conversation, the strains of a waltz, and the discreet assessment of social standing filled these evening hours. These elaborate engagements, while superficially about leisure, were in fact a demanding extension of a Victorian woman's duties, ensuring her family maintained its position within the intricate social tapestry of the era. The performance of respectability and social grace continued well into the night, defining another crucial aspect of what Victorian women did all day. As our journey through the meticulously organized days of Victorian women draws to a close, it becomes clear that their lives were a tapestry woven from endless tasks, social obligations, and constant self-presentation. This brings us to unpaid labor, the invisible work, a concept that highlights the immense yet often unquantified efforts that underpinned their entire existence. Imagine the quiet hum of activity that filled their homes from dawn till dusk, much of it essential for the family's well-being and social standing, yet rarely acknowledged as work in the same way as a man's paid profession. You see, while men went out to the public sphere to earn a living, Victorian women managed the intricate domestic sphere, performing a vast array of duties that, if they had been paid for, would have commanded a considerable salary. This included everything from managing household budgets, overseeing children's education and moral development, organizing social engagements, performing intricate needlework to create or mend clothing, writing extensive correspondence, and engaging in charitable work. None of these activities generated a direct income, yet they were absolutely crucial for maintaining the family's comfort, reputation, and social standing. This mainstream historical fact, the immense volume of unpaid domestic, social, and emotional labor performed by Victorian women, was largely invisible in economic terms but formed the bedrock of their daily lives. Historians still argue whether the societal devaluation of this unpaid labor primarily stemmed from a patriarchal system that elevated male-dominated economic activity, or if it was simply a reflection of an era where domestic work was widely considered a woman's natural role, rather than a quantifiable contribution. It's a bit like trying to put a price tag on breathing. It's essential for life, but you don't pay for it directly. You might find yourself meticulously balancing ledgers, planning menus for weeks in advance, or counseling a distraught child, understanding that these quiet acts of organization and emotional support were as vital to your family's prosperity as your husband's earnings, even if they were never recorded in a ledger or acknowledged with a salary. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Victorian household manuals contained incredibly detailed schedules for every hour of the day for the mistress of the house, outlining everything from what time she should supervise the laying of the breakfast table to when she should review the children's lessons and attend to her correspondence, revealing the sheer meticulousness of their unpaid work. Imagine a daily planner filled with tasks from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., with hardly a moment for personal leisure. The quiet dedication to these endless tasks, the constant effort to create a haven of comfort and respectability, meant that a Victorian woman's day was defined by a profound sense of purpose, even if the world at large rarely acknowledged the true economic and social value of her ceaseless efforts. This invisible labor, performed tirelessly behind the scenes, was perhaps the most defining aspect of what Victorian women truly did all day. As the gaslights dim and the hum of the city outside fades, you can almost hear the rustle of a stiff crinoline, the quiet turning of a page in a domestic manual, and the soft murmur of chores completed and duties fulfilled. Let the anxieties of a bygone era, the strictures and the surprising joys of Victorian daily life gently recede now. The history, the knowledge, the quiet insights into how lives were lived now drifts away on the soft currents of your breath. Allow yourself to loosen your grip on the day's thoughts, letting them soften and blur. The whispers of the past are becoming fainter, merging with the calm, steady rhythm of your own heart. All the complexities, all the worries, all the curious detail, they are simply sounds now fading into the comfortable quiet. Just listen to the soft hush, feel the peaceful stillness surrounding you, and let your mind unwind. Sweet dreams.